Welcome to Her Secret Truth, a place where the truth always comes out. Here you'll hear stories of family betrayals, hidden secrets, and shocking revelations. Every story is a step closer to the truth someone tried to hide. Subscribe to Her Secret Truth so you don't miss new stories you won't be able to stop watching. I spent $19,500 paying for my granddaughter's Sweet 16. Just 1 week later, my daughter-in-law sent me a message saying she didn't want older people ruining the party, and that I was no longer invited. Because of that, on the night before the celebration I canceled everything. When my son kept calling over and over again, I finally answered around the 50th call and told him something he probably did not want to hear. I explained that he had raised his daughter in a way that made her ashamed of her own family, and then I added that he should feel proud of that achievement. Daniel, if you are watching this, make sure to subscribe and tell me where you are watching from. At first, you might think this is just a bitter story from an older woman. But let me explain how everything started, because the situation really began about 6 months earlier, when my granddaughter Sophie casually mentioned that she wanted the most unforgettable Sweet 16 party imaginable. By the time someone reaches 67, they usually learn to recognize manipulation from far away. Still, when that manipulation comes from your own granddaughter, smiling with braces and those unmistakable Carter family blue eyes, it becomes much harder to stay firm. Even people who believe they are strong can find their hearts wrapped around those small fingers. Sophie had curled up next to me on my living room couch when she brought it up. In a hopeful voice, she explained that all of her friends were having incredible birthday parties. Madison's parents had rented an entire country club for their daughter's celebration, and Sophia was planning a winter wonderland theme complete with real snow machines. Looking back now, I should have realized something was coming when Olivia, my daughter-in-law, suddenly walked in from the kitchen carrying tea she had never offered to make before. She placed the cups down carefully and gently suggested that Sophie should not trouble her grandmother with long discussions about party plans. Sophie ignored the hint and continued. She said she only wanted something special, something that would show how much our family meant to each other. The way she said the word family made my chest tighten. My husband Andrew had died 2 years earlier, and since then the time I spent with Sophie had meant everything to me. Daniel was almost always busy with work, and Olivia tolerated me at best. I eventually asked Sophie what she had in mind, even though I already felt that I had moved from simply listening to becoming part of whatever plan was unfolding. Sophie's eyes immediately lit up. She started describing a place called Riverside Gardens, explaining that they hosted beautiful themed parties. The rental for the venue alone was about $8,000, but she asked me to imagine dancing under fairy lights by the river. $8,000. I could feel Olivia watching me closely, waiting for my reaction. Sophie kept going and explained that they would also need catering. She mentioned a company called Yeppies that prepared incredible Italian spreads, and said everyone claimed they were the best. I asked carefully how much all of this would cost together. Sophie hesitated and bit her lip before saying it might be around $20,000. She quickly added that a Sweet 16 only happens once in a lifetime. $20,000. My Social Security together with Andrew's pension allowed me to live comfortably, but $20,000 was still serious money. Even so, when I looked at Sophie's hopeful expression, I felt myself beginning to give in. I told her that I needed some time to think about it. That was when Olivia stepped forward and said it was incredibly generous of me to even consider such a thing. She also mentioned that Sophie might be dreaming a little too big, but then reminded me that I had always been the type of grandmother who helped make dreams come true. The praise sounded thick, almost like molasses, and something about it bothered me. Beneath the sweetness there was a sharp edge, almost as if she were following a prepared script. Then, 3 days later, Sophie called me crying. She explained that Madison's mother had said Sophie could not compete with Madison's party if she ended up having something simple like a backyard barbecue. Sophie begged me to understand, saying she would feel completely humiliated in front of her friends. That same night, I wrote the first check. Before you judge me too harshly for falling for such an obvious trick, let me explain what my family looked like from my perspective. Daniel is my only child. When his father left us while he was 12, it became just Mike and me against the world. I worked double shifts at the hospital, saved every dollar I could, and managed to pay for his college tuition. Over time, I watched him grow into a man I was proud of. He later became an engineer, married Olivia when he was 35, and gave me the granddaughter I had always dreamed about. Olivia Bennett Carter came from money, old Chicago money, the kind connected to trust funds and summer houses in Michigan. When Daniel first brought her home about 7 years earlier, she was polite enough. Still, I always felt like she was evaluating me instead of welcoming me. Whenever I mentioned feeling uncomfortable around her, Daniel would explain that she was simply particular and that I should give her time. 7 years later, I was still being told to give her time. But Sophie felt different. From the moment she was born, she seemed as much mine as she was theirs. While Olivia focused on her interior design business and Daniel worked 60-hour weeks, I was the one teaching Sophie how to bake cookies, taking her to museums, and listening to the drama of her middle school life. Or at least that was what I believed. After I wrote that first check for the venue, the requests started flowing. Designer decorations from some boutique in Lincoln Park. They also wanted a DJ, someone who supposedly performed at celebrity parties. And then there was the photographer, a man who charged more for 1 hour than I used to earn in an entire week. During one of our shopping trips, Sophie tried to explain why it mattered so much. She said that everyone would be taking pictures and that the photographer would make all the difference. To prove her point, she pulled out her phone and showed me photos from Madison's party. The event in those pictures looked less like a teenager's birthday and more like a movie premiere. I told her the pictures were beautiful. Sophie quickly replied that she knew it was expensive, but she wanted me to think about the future. She said the photos would last forever and that someday, when she was old like me, she would show them to her grandchildren. Old like me. That phrase stung more than I expected. Every time I hesitated, Olivia appeared with exactly the right comment. She would calmly explain that teenage girls care deeply about their image, and that confidence at that age depends on it. According to her, they simply wanted Sophie to feel proud and happy. By the end of month 3, I had written checks totaling $15,000. By month 5, the amount had climbed to $19,000. All the while, a strange feeling of unease kept growing inside me, though I could not quite explain why. Maybe it was the way Olivia's eyes seemed to gleam whenever I reached for my checkbook. Maybe it was the fact that Sophie's requests always came with neatly prepared price quotes already researched. Or maybe it was because neither of them ever asked whether I could actually afford any of this. But they were family. And family supports each other, right? The moment that should have made me stop came when Olivia suggested that I also cover Sophie's dress shopping trip at a boutique in downtown Chicago. She explained that the dress was the centerpiece of the entire event, while already pulling up the boutique's website. Sophie had found the gown she loved, but the price was $2,500. Spending $2,500 on a dress a 16-year-old would wear once felt excessive to me, and I said so carefully. Sophie's voice immediately shifted into the wounded tone I had come to dread. She reminded me that this was her special day. So I wrote the check. The next morning I sat in my kitchen staring at my bank balance, wondering when exactly I had lost control of the entire situation. More than that, I wondered why I suddenly felt like a stranger in my own family. The message arrived on a Tuesday morning, while I was drinking coffee and reviewing the final party details. By that point, $19,500 had been spent, and everything was ready for Sophie's Sweet 16 on Saturday. The text came from Olivia. She wrote that Sophie had been thinking and had realized she wanted her party to feel more like a young people's event. Because of that, she preferred not to have older family members there since it might make her friends uncomfortable. Olivia added that she hoped I would understand and said the family could celebrate with me separately another time. I read the message twice, convinced I must have misunderstood. Older family members. As if I were some ancient relic who might embarrass the precious princess at the party I had just funded to the tune of nearly $20,000. I called Daniel immediately. He answered casually and asked what was going on. His voice had that distracted tone that suggested he was probably checking emails while talking. I told him that Olivia had just uninvited me from Sophie's party. There was silence for a moment. Then he asked what I meant by uninvited. I read the text message to him word for word. Another pause followed. He said there must be some misunderstanding and insisted that Olivia would never do something like that. I told him she absolutely would, and she already had. Then I reminded him that I had paid for everything: the venue, the catering, the decorations, the photographer, almost $20,000 in total. When he heard that number, his voice sharpened. He admitted he had no idea the cost was that high because Olivia had told him I simply wanted to contribute. Contribute? As if I had offered to bring a casserole to a potluck. I told Daniel he needed to deal with this with his wife. He said he would speak with Olivia and Sophie, and that he was sure everything could be worked out. But deep down I already knew it couldn't. You don't accidentally send a message that cruel. You don't casually uninvite the person who's paying for the entire event, unless you never wanted them there in the first place. That afternoon I finally did something I probably should have done months earlier. I began making phone calls. The first call went to Riverside Gardens. The event coordinator greeted me warmly and said that everything was perfectly prepared for Saturday, and that the final payment had cleared earlier that morning. I told her that I needed to ask about their cancellation policy. There was a short pause before she explained that events scheduled this close to the date normally required full payment. Still, she added that if there were a genuine emergency, sometimes arrangements could be discussed. After that, I called Yeppy's Catering. They sounded enthusiastic and said they were very excited for Sophie's party, explaining that the Italian spread would be magnificent. I asked what would happen if I needed to cancel. The caterer's voice immediately became more cautious. She reminded me that the event was only 4 days away, and explained that the ingredients had already been purchased and staff members had already been scheduled. Then I called the DJ, the photographer, and the florist. Each conversation followed the same pattern. Everything was confirmed. Every service had already been paid for. And yes, canceling this close to the date would be complicated and expensive. But here is something you learn when you are 67 years old and have gone through losing a husband, decades working in healthcare, and raising a son on your own. Sometimes the most expensive decision is still the right one. By 5 o'clock, I understood exactly what I was dealing with. More importantly, I had a plan. Sophie called that evening, her voice sounding unusually bright. She asked if I was excited about Saturday, and said she could not wait for me to see how everything turned out. I asked her calmly whether she was excited for me to see it, because according to her mother I would not be attending. Her voice faltered. She tried to brush it off and told me not to be upset. She explained that her friends thought family parties were a little lame. I told her I understood and then asked who had paid for the party that was apparently too lame for family members. Silence followed. I asked her again to answer. Eventually she admitted that I had paid for it, but said I had wanted to do something special for her. I told her that what I wanted was to celebrate with her, and that there was a difference between those two things. Another silence followed. Then I asked her something else. I asked whether she would still want me there if I had not paid for any of it. This time the pause was even longer. When she finally answered, her voice was small. She said the question was not fair. But it was fair. It was the only fair question in this entire mess. On Wednesday, Daniel arrived at my house without warning. He looked like someone who would have preferred to be anywhere else. He said we needed to talk. I let him inside but did not offer coffee. This was not a social visit. Before he even sat down, he said that Olivia had already explained everything and that Sophie was simply going through a phase. He added that teenage girls often become overly concerned with appearances. I asked him if that was so and told him to explain it to me. I asked him to describe the phase where accepting nearly $20,000 from your grandmother and then uninviting her becomes normal teenage behavior. Daniel ran his hands through his hair, something I remembered from his difficult teenage years. Apparently some habits never change. He insisted the situation was not about the money. I told him that from where I was sitting it looked exactly like it was about the money. Olivia and Sophie had received what they wanted, and now the inconvenient old woman who paid for it was being discarded. He protested and said I was being dramatic. I told him that dramatic is the word women often hear when they dare to point out they are being treated badly. Then I asked him a question and told him to think carefully before answering. If his daughter was embarrassed by her own grandmother, what did that say about the way he and Olivia had raised her? His face immediately flushed. He said that was not fair. I told him that what truly was not fair was teaching a child that love comes with a price tag, and that family members become disposable once they have served their purpose. I walked over to my desk and pulled out a folder I had prepared the night before. Inside were copies of every check I had written, every receipt, and every invoice connected to Sophie's party. I spread the papers across the coffee table and told him the total. $19,537. That was the price of his daughter being embarrassed by me. Daniel looked through the documents, and with each page his face became paler. He finally admitted that he had no idea the amount was that high. I told him that his wife certainly knew, because Olivia had helped Sophie ask for most of it. I watched the realization slowly appear in his eyes. Daniel might avoid confrontation, but he was not stupid. Quietly, he said that Olivia must have planned the whole thing. I asked him what he thought. He sank back onto the couch looking defeated and asked what I expected him to do. I told him I wanted him to act like a father. I wanted him to explain to his daughter that actions have consequences. And I wanted him to have a serious conversation with his wife about respect. He then asked if doing that would mean I would forgive and forget. I smiled, though there was very little warmth in it. I told him that it was already a little late for that. He asked what I meant. I explained that I had already started making phone calls and that when you pay for something in full, you gain certain authority over it. His face went pale. He asked what I had done. I told him nothing had happened yet, but that I still had until tomorrow night to make some final decisions about Saturday's event. He asked if I was really considering canceling the services I had paid for and refusing to fund a party where I was not welcome. Daniel stood up abruptly. Daniel told me I could not punish Sophie just because I was angry with Olivia. I calmly answered that I was not punishing anyone at all. I explained that I was simply applying the same logic Sophie and Olivia had already used. If I was considered too embarrassing to attend the party, then it only made sense that I was also too embarrassing to pay for it. Daniel insisted that all of Sophie's friends were expecting the party. I asked him whether they were expecting a party in general, or whether they were expecting a party funded by the grandmother who was apparently so shameful she could not even be seen in public. Daniel began pacing across the room, an old habit from his teenage years. He asked me to please just come to the party and said we could work everything else out later. I asked him if he could hear himself. I reminded him that he was asking me to spend $20,000 just for the privilege of being tolerated by my own family. He stopped pacing and looked at me with an expression that seemed to mix respect with fear. Then he asked what it would take for me to let the party happen. I thought about that carefully, not because I intended to negotiate, but because I wanted Daniel to understand exactly what his wife and daughter had done to this family. I told him it would require Sophie to call me personally, not send a message, but actually call and offer a sincere apology for treating me like a walking ATM. Olivia would also need to acknowledge what she had done and take responsibility for it. And Daniel himself would need to promise that this kind of manipulation would never happen again. I asked him whether that sounded reasonable. He said it did. I told him to make it happen. He left, promising that he would fix everything. But by then I had already realized that some things simply cannot be repaired. Thursday passed without a single phone call. On Friday morning a group message arrived including me, Daniel and Olivia. Sophie wrote that she could not wait for tomorrow and said it was going to be the best day ever. She added that she loved all of us. The message appeared as if nothing had happened, as if the entire week of manipulation and hurt could simply disappear behind cheerful words and heart emojis. I replied politely and told her to have a wonderful time. Almost immediately, Olivia sent me a private message thanking me for understanding and saying they would make sure to take plenty of pictures for me. Pictures. She expected me to be grateful for photographs of the party I had funded but was not welcome to attend. Around noon Daniel called again. He told me Sophie was very excited and suggested that perhaps we could simply let the entire situation go. He explained that teenage girls can be emotional and dramatic, and sometimes fail to think things through. I asked him whether that description also applied to 38-year-old women married to my son. There was silence. Then I asked him directly whether Sophie had called to apologize. He replied that she had been very busy with party preparations. I reminded him that this was not the question I asked. Eventually he admitted that she had not called. Then I asked whether Olivia had acknowledged what she had done. After another pause, Daniel said Olivia believed I was turning the situation into a much bigger issue than it needed to be. I repeated his words slowly. According to Olivia, taking nearly $20,000 from me, and then uninviting me was apparently just a minor social misunderstanding. Daniel tried to explain that she had not meant it the way it sounded. I asked him how exactly she had meant it. He could not answer because both of us already knew exactly what Olivia had meant. At 3 o'clock on Friday afternoon, I made my final decision. I began by calling Riverside Gardens. The coordinator answered politely and asked how she could help. I told her that I needed to cancel the event scheduled for the following day. The silence on the other end of the line was immediate. She reminded me that the event was tomorrow, and that all preparations were already complete. I told her I understood that and that I was willing to pay whatever penalties were required. She began explaining that everything for the Carter Sweet 16 was ready, and that the staff had already been scheduled. I repeated that the event was cancelled and asked her to remove the decorations and notify the staff. Next I called Yeppy's Catering. They sounded shocked and tried to confirm that I really intended to cancel. They explained that the food had already been prepared, and that the ingredients alone had cost a significant amount. I told them I would cover whatever penalties were required, but the catering order was cancelled. After that I called the DJ, the photographer, and the florist. Each conversation followed the same pattern. First shock, then disbelief, and finally reluctant acceptance once they realized I was serious. By 5 o'clock, Sophie's perfect Sweet 16 existed only in her imagination. At 7:30 that evening my phone started ringing. Daniel's name appeared on the caller ID. I let it ring again and again, 53 times according to my call log. Finally, close to midnight, I answered. I greeted him calmly. He immediately asked what I had done. His voice sounded hoarse from shouting, probably at Olivia, possibly at Sophie, and very likely at the consequences of his own decisions. I told him I had simply made some business decisions regarding services I had paid for. He repeated the phrase in disbelief and reminded me that Sophie's party was supposed to be tomorrow. I told him that was interesting, because I had not been invited and therefore had not been keeping track. He insisted I could not do this to her. And that was the moment I finally said the words that felt like 30 years of frustration finding their voice. I told him that he and Olivia had taught Sophie that I was too embarrassing to be included in her celebration, and that I was simply agreeing with them. The silence that followed lasted long enough for me to wonder whether the call had disconnected. Eventually Daniel spoke again, but his voice sounded smaller, almost childlike. He said Sophie was devastated. He reminded me that all her friends had been invited, and that she had been talking about this party for months. I asked whether, during all that talking, she had ever once mentioned how grateful she was to her grandmother for making the entire celebration possible. He tried to defend her by saying she was just a child. I reminded him that she was 16, Daniel. At 16, I was already working after school to help support my family. At 16, you were volunteering every weekend at the animal shelter. At 16, a person is old enough to understand gratitude and respect. In the background I could hear Olivia's voice, sharp and angry, although I could not make out the exact words. Daniel said that Olivia wanted to speak with me. I told him I was sure she did. I heard the phone move as it changed hands. Olivia spoke next, her voice cold and sharp, saying she did not understand what kind of game I thought I was playing, but insisting that I was hurting an innocent child. I asked Olivia if I was really the one hurting an innocent child, because that same innocent child had seemed perfectly comfortable hurting her own grandmother. Olivia replied that Sophie never meant to hurt me, and that she had only been trying to avoid an awkward situation with her friends. I asked what exactly would have been awkward about a grandmother attending her granddaughter's party. Olivia tried to explain that it was simply a generational difference. She said teenagers behave differently when adults are around and that the kids might have felt they had to act more carefully. I pointed out that the adult she was talking about was also the adult who paid for the entire party. Olivia quickly replied that I had offered to help and that no one had forced me. That was the lie I had been waiting for her to say. I asked her directly whether I had truly offered, or whether she and Sophie had repeatedly asked for money while carefully researching how much everything would cost. Olivia said she had no idea what I was implying. I told her I was not implying anything. I was stating clearly that she and Sophie had manipulated me into paying for a party they never intended for me to attend. She called the accusation ridiculous. I asked her a simple question. When exactly had she planned to uninvite me? Was it before the first check I wrote, or only after they had received everything they needed? The silence on the other end of the phone told me everything. I continued speaking and explained what would happen next. Instead of hosting a party she could not afford at a venue she did not pay for with food she did not buy, Sophie would learn something important about consequences. And Olivia would learn something about respect. Olivia argued that I could not destroy a child's special day simply because my feelings were hurt. I told her to watch me. Then I hung up. The phone started ringing immediately afterward, but I turned it off. Saturday morning arrived gray and drizzly, which somehow felt appropriate. I made coffee, scrambled some eggs, and sat on my back porch watching the neighbor's cat wander through my garden. Everything was calm and quiet, the complete opposite of what would have been happening at Riverside Gardens around that time. At 9:30 my doorbell rang. When I looked through the peephole, I saw Sophie standing on my front step. She was still wearing her pajamas, and her eyes were red from crying. I opened the door. Her voice sounded small and broken as she asked me to please reconsider because all of her friends were expecting the party. Seeing her standing there, I felt a sudden sharp pang of something that might have been regret. After all, she was still my granddaughter, the same little girl who used to beg for one more bedtime story before going to sleep. But she was also the young woman who had looked me in the eye and asked for thousands of dollars while planning to exclude me from the celebration. I asked her why she thought it was acceptable to take money from someone she intended to uninvite. Her face crumpled immediately. She tried to say she had not planned it and began explaining that her mother had told her certain things. She insisted she never meant for everything to turn out this way. I asked her what she had actually expected to happen. Through tears she admitted that she only wanted a perfect party like the ones all her friends had. I asked whether she truly believed that a perfect party could not include her own grandmother. She tried to answer but became confused and emotional, crying harder as she spoke. Her friends, she said, would have thought it was strange. I asked whether that was really the problem, or whether she had simply been embarrassed by me. The truth was written clearly on her face before she could even try to deny it. I told her softly that I wanted her to think about the kind of person she was becoming. At that point she broke down completely, sobbing on my doorstep like the child she still was in many ways. And that was when something shifted in my mind. Watching Sophie cry there made me realize that this situation was no longer only about revenge. For a moment, standing there while she sobbed, my determination almost weakened. Almost. Then I remembered the casual cruelty in the text message and the entitled assumption that I would happily pay for my own exclusion. I invited her inside. She followed me into the kitchen where I poured her a glass of orange juice and placed a box of tissues on the table. It is strange how people return to childhood comforts during moments of crisis. Sophie asked me again if I could fix everything. I asked her what exactly she wanted me to fix. She said the party. She begged me to call everyone back and tell them the cancellations were a mistake. I sat down across from her at my small kitchen table. Then I asked if she truly understood what she and her mother had done to me. She said they had hurt my feelings and that she was sorry. I told her it went deeper than hurt feelings. What she had shown me revealed how she saw me and where I truly fit in her life. She wiped her nose with a tissue and tried to protest. She said she loved me. I asked whether she loved me, or whether she loved what I could provide for her. The question hung in the air between us. She said that was not fair. I asked her when the last time was that she had called me simply to talk, not to ask for something and not because her parents reminded her, but just because she wanted to hear my voice. She opened her mouth to answer, then closed it. Then I asked when she had last asked about my life, about how I was coping after Grandpa Andrew died, whether I ever felt lonely, or how I spent my days. Her face turned red, the kind of deep color that appears when someone begins to recognize an uncomfortable truth about themselves. Sophie tried to explain that she was busy with school and friends. I told her I understood that, but relationships are not one-way streets. For 6 months, she and her mother had treated me like a bank account with legs. Sophie said her mom told her that I wanted to help. I replied that I did want to help, but I also wanted to be part of the celebration. I wanted to watch her blow out the candles and dance with her friends. I wanted to take pictures and probably embarrass her by crying because my granddaughter was growing up so beautifully. Sophie's tears started again. She said she had not really thought it through. I told her that was exactly the problem. She thought about what she wanted and how to get it, but she did not think about how it would feel to be pushed aside once I had served my purpose. Sophie insisted she could fix everything. She said she would tell everyone the party was back on, and that she would tell her mother she had been wrong. I explained that the vendors had already been canceled. The deposits were gone, but more importantly something between us had broken this week, and that was not something an apology could easily repair. Sophie asked what I meant. I reached across the table and held her hand. I told her she needed to decide what kind of person she wanted to be. She could become someone who uses people, or someone who truly values them. Sophie said she did value me. I told her she would need to prove it. Before she could ask how, the doorbell rang again. Through the peephole I saw Olivia, looking like she had dressed in the middle of a storm. I opened the door. Olivia immediately pushed past me and demanded to know where Sophie was. She told Sophie to get in the car right away. Sophie replied that she was talking to her grandmother. Olivia accused me of manipulating my own granddaughter the same way she believed I had manipulated them. I actually laughed. Then I asked her what exactly I had manipulated them into doing. Olivia said I made them believe that I wanted to help with the party. I answered that I did want to help. I simply also expected to attend. Olivia replied that attending had never been discussed. I told her that was because she never intended to include me. Sophie looked back and forth between us, and I could see understanding slowly appearing on her face. Then she asked her mother whether she had always planned to uninvite me. Olivia paused. That pause was answer enough. Olivia's expression shifted several times before settling into defensive anger. She told Sophie that she had said she wanted a party just for her friends. Sophie immediately corrected her. She said she wanted a cool party, not a party that excluded her grandmother. Olivia tried to remind her that she had said she might be embarrassed if the party felt too much like a family gathering. Sophie replied that she only meant she wanted the party to feel special, not that I should be excluded. I watched the exchange quietly. Olivia was cornered now, trapped between the story she told Sophie and the story she told me. I asked Olivia calmly whether she had planned to uninvite me from the beginning. She denied it and said Sophie had simply changed her mind about what she wanted. Sophie suddenly stood up and told her mother to stop lying. Olivia told her not to be dramatic. Sophie insisted she was not being dramatic. She reminded her mother that weeks earlier she had said I might feel out of place around all of her friends, and that it would be better if the family celebrated separately. Olivia's face turned pale. Sophie continued speaking, her voice growing stronger. She said her mother convinced her it would be awkward otherwise, but she had never mentioned that I would be paying for everything. Olivia tried to defend herself by saying I had offered. Sophie replied that I offered because she and her mother kept asking again and again. Hearing that, I felt a small surge of pride. Sophie was finally seeing the manipulation clearly. Then she started crying again. She said all of her friends knew about the party, and now nothing was happening, and everyone would think she had lied. I spoke gently and asked her what mattered more. What her friends thought or the kind of person she was becoming. Sophie cried that she did not know and that she had only wanted a perfect party. Olivia interrupted sharply and told her to stop exaggerating the situation. She accused me of being vindictive because my feelings had been hurt. That word struck me immediately. Vindictive. As if defending myself was somehow wrong. I asked Olivia a simple question. If I had not paid for the party, would Sophie even be upset about losing it? Olivia said that was not the point. I told her it was exactly the point. She had created a situation where Sophie felt entitled to something she could not afford, and then she excluded the person who made it possible. Olivia said they would have included me in other ways. I asked what she meant by that. She hesitated before mentioning pictures and stories about the party afterward. I pointed out that this meant I would pay for the privilege of hearing about the fun. I was not allowed to attend. Sophie stared at her mother with shock. She said that sounded awful. Olivia insisted Sophie did not understand adult relationships. Sophie replied that she understood one thing clearly. Her grandmother had paid $20,000 for something she was not even allowed to attend. Olivia's composure began to crack. She said I had plenty of money and that the expense was not a hardship for me. That stopped me cold. I asked her to repeat what she had just said. Olivia continued by saying that Andrew had left me very comfortable financially, and that it was not as if I had anything else to spend money on. The audacity of that statement was breathtaking. In Olivia's mind, my money apparently did not really belong to me because I did not have the right kind of expenses. I looked at her and said firmly that whether I could afford something does not give anyone the right to take advantage of me. Olivia insisted that no one had taken advantage of me. Sophie spoke up immediately. Her voice was steady now as she said that yes, they had. She admitted plainly that they had completely taken advantage of her grandmother. Olivia turned sharply toward her daughter and told her they were leaving. Sophie refused. The word hung in the air like a challenge thrown down. Olivia asked what she had just said. Sophie repeated that she was not leaving because she wanted to talk to her grandmother. Olivia ordered her to get into the car immediately. Sophie asked what would happen if she refused. Would her mother ground her? Would she cancel her party? I almost smiled at that. Sophie had already canceled it. Olivia spun toward me and accused me of thinking I was clever. I replied that I finally understood exactly what I was dealing with. Olivia said I was dealing with a family who loved me enough to include me in something special. I reminded her that including me was not what happened. She had uninvited me through a text message. She insisted that was not how it was meant. I told her it meant exactly what she intended. Olivia grabbed Sophie's arm and said they were going home. Sophie told her to let go. Olivia warned her not to force the situation. Sophie asked what that meant. Would she treat her the same way she had treated her grandmother? That comparison struck Olivia like a slap, and her grip loosened. She tried to say it was completely different. Sophie asked how. Olivia could not answer, probably because she was finally seeing how her behavior looked through her daughter's eyes. I told Sophie that her mother and I needed to have a conversation and suggested she go upstairs. I mentioned there were books in my bedroom if she wanted something to read. After Sophie left, Olivia and I stood facing each other in my kitchen like two opponents at high noon. Olivia accused me of turning her daughter against her. I replied that I had simply shown her daughter who she really was. Olivia asked who she was supposed to be. I told her she was someone who believed other people existed to serve her purposes. After Andrew died, she saw my money and my loneliness and decided both could be useful to her. Olivia denied that. I asked her a simple question. Before she needed money for this party, how often did she call me? How often did she invite me over simply to spend time together? She could not answer. I continued by telling her what I believed. She had always resented that Daniel loved me. She had always felt she had to compete with his mother for his attention. Olivia called that ridiculous. I asked if it really was. For 7 years she had tried to reduce my role in his life. She scheduled family events when she knew I had other commitments. She made plans without asking me first. Gradually, she excluded me from their lives except when she needed something. Olivia's face was flushed. She accused me of being paranoid. I asked when the last time was that she invited me to dinner without wanting something. There was silence. I asked when she last told Daniel to call me simply because. More silence. I asked when she last encouraged Sophie to spend time with me without any agenda. Olivia tried to say I was reading too much into normal family dynamics. I told her that in normal families grandmothers are treasured, not merely tolerated. Olivia insisted they did treasure me. I replied that what they really treasured was my bank account. At that moment Sophie's voice came from the staircase. She said that I was right. Both Olivia and I turned. Sophie was sitting on the stairs, clearly having listened to everything. Olivia tried to stop her. Sophie said she needed to talk. She walked back into the kitchen holding a photo album from my bedroom. Inside were pictures of Andrew and me, of Daniel growing up, and of Sophie as a baby and little girl. Sophie showed her mother a photo from her 8th birthday. In the picture I was kneeling beside Sophie helping her blow out the candles, while Olivia stood behind us looking at her phone. Then she showed another photo from Sophie's school play 2 years earlier. I was in the front row clapping enthusiastically while Olivia was visible in the back speaking with another parent. Then she showed a picture from Sophie's middle school graduation. I had my arm around Sophie, both of us smiling proudly, while Olivia stood turned away talking to someone else. Sophie said quietly that she had never noticed it before. But her grandmother was in all her important moments. Her mother was there but not really there. Olivia tried to say she had attended all those events. Sophie admitted that was true physically, but explained that her grandmother had been present in a different way. The wisdom in my 16-year-old granddaughter's words took my breath away. Sophie continued through tears. She admitted she had treated me like I did not matter, and had allowed her mother to convince her that having me at the party would be embarrassing. Olivia tried to interrupt. Sophie stopped her and said she needed to say this. She turned toward me and apologized, not only for the party but for everything. She said she was sorry for taking me for granted, for not seeing how much I loved her, and for allowing her mother to make me feel unwelcome. She said she wanted to be different. She wanted to become the kind of person who deserved a grandmother like me. And at that moment my heart completely broke open. 3 weeks later, I was sitting in my lawyer's office reviewing documents I never imagined I would need. Adrian looked at me carefully, his gray eyebrows raised with concern, and asked whether I was truly certain about this decision. "I'm certain," I said, "because once we file this, Adrian, there is no going back. I'm 77 years old. My husband is gone. My son apparently learned nothing from the party disaster, and my daughter-in-law has just confirmed that she is exactly who I always believed she was." The cancellation of the party had only been the beginning. In the weeks that followed, Olivia launched a campaign of emotional pressure that could have impressed a political strategist. First came the guilt. Phone calls about how I had traumatized Sophie. Text messages claiming Sophie cried herself to sleep. Voicemails warning about the long-term psychological damage I had supposedly caused a child. Then came the threats. Olivia began suggesting that perhaps my decision-making abilities were not what they once were. Maybe Daniel needed to become more involved in my financial affairs. Perhaps I required help managing my money. The final straw came when I discovered Olivia had actually called my bank. She introduced herself as my daughter-in-law and claimed she was worried about unusual activity in my accounts. When I called the bank to complain, the manager explained the situation carefully. He told me that no information had been shared, of course, but that Olivia had been very persistent and seemed convinced she had some kind of right to access my accounts. That was the moment I called Adrian. "The trust structure you're proposing is quite complicated," Adrian said while reviewing the paperwork. "Are you sure you do not want to discuss this with Daniel first?" I told him that Daniel had already had 3 weeks to act like an adult and speak to his wife about boundaries and respect. Instead, Olivia had doubled down on everything. Adrian asked what exactly had happened. I showed him the messages on my phone. One message from Olivia said that we needed to discuss my growing isolation and erratic behavior, because Daniel was concerned. Another message said my vindictive response to what she called a simple misunderstanding suggested troubling changes in my personality. A third message suggested it might be time to consider whether I should be making major financial decisions on my own. Adrian let out a low whistle. He said she was clearly questioning my mental competency. I told him she was trying to build a narrative where I appeared to be an unstable elderly woman who needed her family to protect her from herself. Adrian asked about Daniel. I explained that Daniel was caught in the middle, trying to keep everyone happy, which meant he was essentially enabling Olivia's behavior. Adrian placed the documents down on the desk. He said the plan I was proposing would certainly protect my assets, but it would also create serious conflict within the family. I told him the conflict already existed. I was simply refusing to pretend it did not. He asked me to explain the plan again. I took a deep breath and walked him through it. Everything would be placed into the trust. The house, the investments, and Andrew's life insurance money. Sophie would receive an education fund that Olivia could never touch. Daniel would receive a modest inheritance when I died, but only if he maintained a respectful relationship with me. If he did not, his portion would go to charity. Adrian noted that this created a strong incentive for good behavior. I agreed and said it was also a test. If Daniel chose Olivia's manipulation over his mother's well-being, then he was not the son I believed I raised, and he certainly did not deserve Andrew's legacy. Adrian nodded thoughtfully. Then he asked about the immediate changes. I explained that my house would be transferred to the trust the very next day, and that all my accounts would be restructured. Olivia would wake up Monday morning and discover that her financial access to me had disappeared completely. Adrian said she would be furious. I replied that she would simply be what she had always been. The difference now was that she would no longer be able to hide behind fake concern and manipulation. Adrian asked about Sophie. For the first time in weeks I smiled. Sophie had been calling me every day since the party incident. Real conversations about school, about her friends, about whether she should try out for the debate team. She had also started asking questions about Andrew. She wanted to know what he was like and what our life together had been. Adrian said that was wonderful. I told him she was becoming the person I always believed she could be. Sometimes people have to see the consequences of their choices before they change. Adrian gathered the documents together. He said everything would be ready by Monday. Then he reminded me again that once it was done, there would be no going back. I told him I understood. For years I had not truly been happy within my own family. They made me feel like a burden, like an obligation, like an inconvenient reminder of duty. The only person who made me feel like I truly mattered was my granddaughter. And she had only learned that after seeing me stand up for myself. Adrian said that if Daniel chose Olivia over rebuilding his relationship with me, then at least I would know where I stood. I agreed. And at that point I would stop pretending otherwise. That evening Sophie called me. She asked whether I was really planning to change my will. I said that news seemed to travel quickly in families and asked how she heard about it. Sophie explained that her mother had been shouting about it to her father, accusing me of financial manipulation and claiming I was losing my mind. I asked Sophie what she thought. She said she believed her mother was frightened because she could no longer control me. 6 months after the Sweet 16 that never happened, Sophie graduated from high school as valedictorian. I sat in the front row crying proud tears as she delivered a speech about courage, integrity, and the people who love us enough to hold us accountable. After the ceremony, she found me in the crowd. "Grammy, there's something I want to tell you." "What is it, sweetheart?" I asked. Sophie said she had been thinking about the day I canceled the party. At first she admitted she felt angry, hurt, and embarrassed. I told her I understood that. Then she explained that later she realized something important. She said that I loved her enough to allow her to be angry with me if it meant teaching her a lesson she needed to learn. I felt tears beginning again. I asked what she had learned. Sophie said she learned that real love is not about giving people everything they want. Real love helps people become who they are meant to be. Hearing that, I realized my granddaughter had understood something that had taken me 67 years to learn myself. She added that she also learned you cannot treat people badly and expect them to keep accepting it simply because they are family. I told her that was a difficult lesson. Sophie agreed, but she said her mother needed to learn it too. I glanced around the graduation reception. Daniel stood with a group of parents, talking and smiling proudly. Olivia stood nearby but remained separate from the conversation. In fact, she had barely spoken to me beyond a few polite greetings. The trust had done exactly what I intended. It removed Olivia's financial incentive for maintaining a relationship with me, and by doing that it revealed that she had never truly wanted one. Sophie asked if she could ask me something. I told her she could ask anything. She wanted to know if I ever regretted canceling the party. I thought about the question carefully. I said I regretted that it had been necessary. I regretted that her mother and I had never managed to find mutual respect. But I did not regret standing up for myself. Sophie said her father believed I had changed. I asked whether she thought that was true. She said I seemed stronger now, more like my real self. That made perfect sense to me. For years I had been shrinking myself to fit into the version of me that suited them best, quiet, undemanding, grateful for whatever attention they decided to give. I told Sophie something important. She never had to accept being treated badly. Not by friends, not by partners, and not even by family. Love never requires a person to tolerate disrespect. Sophie asked whether that was the reason I changed my will, whether it was about protecting myself. I explained that I changed the will to protect what her grandfather and I had built together. I wanted to make sure that the people who benefited from our life's work were people who valued the same things we valued. And if Daniel chose not to value those things, then he would have made his choice and I would have made mine. Sophie hugged me then tightly and fiercely. She said she was proud of me. I told her I was proud of her too. As we stood together in the busy reception hall, I felt something I had not felt in years. Complete peace with my decisions. The party that never happened had cost me $19,500. But it had given me something far more valuable. It gave me the certainty that I was worth more than convenience, more than obligation, and more than the role others expected me to play. 6 months later, Sophie began college with a full scholarship and a trust fund ready to cover anything the scholarship did not. Daniel and I started meeting for coffee once a week, slowly rebuilding our relationship in a way that respected both of us. Olivia and I kept a polite distance. And as for me, I learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable someone else's worst behavior, even when that person is family, even when it costs you everything you thought you wanted, even when it means canceling the party. Thank you for listening. Do not forget to subscribe, and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.